She was 4 years old. No gloves, no hat, boots too small for the snow. She had been walking for 8 blocks in the freezing dark because Mommy was on the floor. And Mommy wouldn't open her eyes. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know that grown men feared his name. She didn't know that the man standing by that black car had never been gentle with anyone in his life. All she knew was that she needed help. So she walked up to him, looked up with those big, tear-filled eyes, and with a voice barely louder than the falling snow, she said, "Sir, I'm scared. Mommy won't wake up." He looked down at her, and something inside him shattered. He took off his $4,000 coat, wrapped it around her tiny shoulders, and said 3 words that changed both of their lives forever. "Take me to her." That night, a little girl went looking for a stranger. She found a monster, but the monster became her miracle. The snow fell like silence over Chicago. Not the kind of snow children dream about, not the soft, picture book flurries that dust rooftops and make the world feel gentle. This was January snow, the kind that bites, the kind that turns the lakefront wind into something with teeth. The kind that makes you pull your collar up and walk faster and wonder why anyone ever chose to live in this city at all. It was 9:47 on a Thursday night, and Michigan Avenue had already emptied. The holiday decorations still clung to the lampposts, frosted garlands, dim golden lights, but the magic of Christmas had packed up and left 2 weeks ago. What remained was just January. Just the cold. Just the long stretch of winter that still had months to go. On the corner of East Illinois and North St. Clair, tucked behind an unmarked black awning, sat a restaurant that didn't advertise. No sign on the door, no listing on any app. The kind of place where the maitre d' knew your name or you didn't get past the lobby. The kind of place where the wine list started at $300, and the conversations at the corner table were worth more than everything in the cellar combined. Inside, the last table of the night was clearing. 3 men in dark suits stood as a 4th remained seated. He didn't stand. He never stood first. He was the reason they had come, and he would be the reason they left. His name was Milo Kessler, 32 years old, 6'1", dark hair cut close on the sides, longer on top, pushed back with the kind of effortless precision that came from a barber who charged $400 a visit. Jaw like a blade, eyes the color of winter, pale gray-blue, clear and flat. The kind of eyes that made people look away without understanding why. He wore a charcoal cashmere overcoat over a black turtleneck. No tie, no cufflinks, no jewelry except a single watch, a Patek Philippe Calatrava inherited from a man he'd buried 7 years ago. The watch was worth more than most people's houses, but Milo didn't wear it for its value. He wore it because it was the only thing his father had ever given him that didn't come with a condition. The 3 men said their goodnights with careful nods, no handshakes. Milo didn't shake hands at the end of meetings. It implied equality, and these meetings were never between equals. He'd just finalized the acquisition of a shipping corridor along the Great Lakes. On paper, it was a logistics agreement between 2 legitimate freight companies. In reality, it gave Milo Kessler uncontested control over the movement of certain goods from Milwaukee to Detroit. The kind of goods that didn't appear on manifests. It wasn't drugs. Milo didn't touch drugs. His father had, and it had killed him, slowly, from the inside out, rotting his judgment long before the cancer rotted his body. Milo dealt in influence, in territory, in leverage. He dealt in silence, the kind that could be bought and the kind that had to be enforced. He was, by every measure the underworld recognized, one of the most powerful men in the Midwest. And by every measure a therapist might recognize, if he'd ever seen one, he was one of the most isolated. Victor was already waiting by the car. Victor Markov, 6'4", former Spetsnaz. Built like a refrigerator someone had taught to drive. He'd been Milo's head of security for 5 years, less a bodyguard and more a shadow with a concealed carry permit. He held the rear door of the black Escalade open, breath curling in the frozen air. "Boss," he said, 1 word. It was enough. Milo buttoned his overcoat as he stepped out of the restaurant. The cold hit him immediately, sharp and clean, and he welcomed it. He'd always preferred cold to heat. Cold was controlled. Cold was quiet. Cold didn't ask anything of you. He was 4 steps from the car when he heard it. A voice, small, trembling, coming from somewhere to his left, near the narrow alley that ran between the restaurant and the office building next door. "Sir." Milo stopped. Victor's hand moved reflexively toward his holster. In their world, surprises came with consequences. A voice in the dark could be a distraction, a setup, an ambush. But this voice was none of those things. "Sir, I'm scared. Mommy won't wake up." Milo turned. She was standing at the edge of the alley, half in shadow, half caught in the amber glow of the streetlight. A girl, tiny, 4 years old, maybe 5, wearing a puffy pink coat that was at least a size too small, zipped crookedly over what looked like pajamas. Her boots were brown, scuffed, with the sole of the left one peeling away from the toe. No hat, no gloves. Her hands were balled into fists at her sides, pressed against her thighs as if she was trying to keep them warm through sheer willpower. Her face was round and flushed red from the cold. Blonde hair, tangled and wind-blown, falling over her forehead and into her eyes. And those eyes, brown, enormous, wet with tears that hadn't fallen yet, were looking directly at Milo with the kind of desperate hope that only children are capable of. The kind that assumes adults can fix anything. The kind that hasn't yet learned that most adults can barely fix themselves. Victor stepped forward, his hand still near his hip. "Boss!" Milo raised one hand. Just a small gesture, 2 fingers barely lifted, but Victor stopped instantly, because in 5 years, he had learned that Milo Kessler communicated more in a 2-finger gesture than most men did in a speech. Milo looked at the girl. She was shaking, not just from the cold, from something deeper. The kind of shaking that comes from a fear so big, it doesn't have words yet. She was terrified and brave at the same time, brave enough to walk through the freezing dark to find someone, anyone, who could help. Milo's jaw tightened, barely perceptible. A micro-expression that someone who didn't know him would miss entirely. But Victor saw it, and Victor, who had watched Milo negotiate with arms dealers and walk away from explosions without blinking, felt something shift in the air. Because that micro-expression was something Victor had never seen on his boss's face before. It was recognition, not of the girl. Milo had never seen her before in his life, but of something in her. Something behind those enormous, tear-filled eyes. Something that reached past the walls. Milo had spent 32 years building, and found a crack he didn't know existed. He breathed, slowly, through his nose, the way he did when he was making a decision that couldn't be undone. Then he crouched down. Milo Kessler, who hadn't bent for anyone in a decade, crouched down on the frozen sidewalk so that his eyes were level with hers. "What's your name?" he asked. His voice was low, steady, quiet. The same voice he used in negotiation. "Mom. At home. She's on the floor." Mom. At home. She's on the floor. I tried to wake her up, but she won't. She won't open her eyes." The tears finally fell, 2 thick trails down her red cheeks. "I shook her, and she won't wake up." Milo's chest tightened. He didn't show it. "How far is your home?" Lily pointed, east, toward the tangle of streets that led away from the glittering towers of the Magnificent Mile and into the neighborhoods that tourists never saw. The Chicago that didn't make it onto postcards. It's by the church, the big brown one, with the broken window." Milo knew the area. Not because he'd ever lived there, but because he owned 3 buildings in that neighborhood. Rental properties, low-income housing, buildings managed by a property company that was managed by a holding company that was managed by a trust that eventually led back to him. He'd never set foot inside any of them. He stood. "Victor, call an ambulance to..." He looked at Lily. "Do you know your address, Lily?" She shook her head, then stopped. It's the red building. The one with the fire escape that's broken. Apartment 4B. Victor was already on his phone. Milo looked at the girl, looked at the snow falling around her, looked at her bare hands and her too small coat and her peeling boot. And then Milo Kessler did something that, if his associates had seen it, would have made them question whether they were hallucinating. He took off his overcoat. $4,000 of Italian cashmere. He bent down and wrapped it around Lily's shoulders. It swallowed her entirely, falling past her feet, making her look like a small pink face emerging from a sea of charcoal wool. "Take me to her," he said. They moved fast. Victor drove while Milo sat in the back seat with Lily. She'd climbed in without hesitation. Children don't understand caution the way adults do, especially children who are frightened enough. She sat wrapped in his coat, her wet boots, leaving marks on the leather seat, and pointed directions with a shaking finger. "Turn there, by the sign, the one with the dog on it." Milo watched her. He didn't speak. He didn't reassure her with empty platitudes. He simply watched, and in watching, something very old and very buried began to stir inside him. He knew what it felt like to be small and scared. He'd spent the first decade of his life being exactly that. His mother had died when he was 6, an aneurysm, sudden and total, in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon. One moment she was pouring orange juice, the next she was on the kitchen floor, and young Milo had stood there, just like this girl, shaking her, calling her name, not understanding why the most important person in his world had simply stopped. His father, Klaus Kessler, the man who built the empire Milo now ran, had been in a meeting. It took him 4 hours to come to the hospital, 4 hours during which 6-year-old Milo sat in a plastic chair in a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and listened to strangers decide things about his life. Klaus never spoke about Milo's mother again, not once. He removed every photograph, donated her clothes, repainted the kitchen. And when Milo cried at night, which he did for months, Klaus would stand in the doorway of his son's room and say in his flat, German-accented English, "Kesslers do not cry. Close your eyes, go to sleep." Milo learned. He closed his eyes. He stopped crying. He became what his father demanded. Controlled, calculating, cold. The perfect heir to an empire built on silence. But now, sitting in the back seat of his Escalade with a 4-year-old girl wrapped in his coat, something in that silence cracked. Just a hairline fracture, barely visible, but there. "That one," Lily pointed. "The red one." The building was exactly what Milo had expected, and nothing he was prepared for. 5 stories of faded red brick, a fire escape that sagged like a broken spine. Half the windows dark, the other half lit with the bluish glow of televisions. The front door didn't lock. The latch had been broken so long that someone had given up and wedged a cinder block against it. The hallway inside smelled like cooking grease, mildew, and the particular brand of industrial cleaner that landlords buy in bulk when they're trying to mask the fact that nothing has been properly maintained in years. The stairwell light flickered. The carpet on the stairs was worn through to the wood in the center. 4th floor. Apartment B. The door was open. Lily had left it open when she'd run out. Milo stepped inside, and the world he knew, the world of Kashmir and Patek Philippe and private dining rooms, fell away like a curtain. The apartment was small. 2 rooms and a kitchen that was more of an alcove. Clean, that was the first thing he noticed. Despite everything, it was clean. The dishes were washed, the floor was swept. There were children's drawings on the refrigerator, held up by magnets shaped like ladybugs. A small bookshelf in the corner held children's books arranged by size, their spines cracked from rereading. But the signs of struggle were everywhere. A stack of medical bills on the kitchen counter, rubber banded together, the top one stamped, "Final notice" in red, an eviction warning taped to the inside of a cabinet door, as if the woman who lived here couldn't bear to look at it, but couldn't bring herself to throw it away. A calendar on the wall with work shifts, written in 3 different colors. Blue for one job, green for another, red for a third. Almost every day had all 3 colors, 3 jobs. And there, on the floor between the kitchen and the bedroom, lay the woman. She was on her side, one arm stretched forward, as if she'd been reaching for something when she fell. Her dark brown hair fanned across the worn linoleum. She was wearing scrubs, the kind nurses wear, pale blue, with a name tag clipped to the breast pocket that read, Nora. Just Nora. No last name. She was pale. Her lips had a bluish tint. Her breathing was shallow and irregular, The kind of breathing that sounds like the body is fighting to keep going, when the mind has already surrendered. Milo knelt beside her. He didn't touch her. He assessed, the way he'd been taught to assess situations, quickly, systematically, without emotion. Her pulse was weak but present. Her skin was clammy and cold. On the counter above her, he noticed a small, black case, a glucometer. Beside it, an empty insulin pen. Diabetic. He looked around, found a juice box in the refrigerator, the kind with a little straw attached. He'd seen enough. He understood. This woman, this Nora, was type 1 diabetic. The insulin pen was empty because insulin costs money she didn't have. The glucometer told the rest of the story. She'd been rationing, skipping doses, stretching a month's supply into 2, then 3, gambling with her own biochemistry because the alternative was choosing between medicine and rent, between her health and her daughter's dinner. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't cinematic. It was ordinary, horrifyingly, heartbreakingly ordinary. This was how people died in America, not in explosions or gunfights, but slowly, quietly, in small apartments, because the richest country in the world had decided that keeping its citizens alive was a luxury some couldn't afford. Lily stood in the doorway, clutching Milo's coat around her like a shield. "Is Mommy going to be okay?" Milo looked at her, those enormous brown eyes, that trembling chin, that fierce, desperate hope. He thought of himself at 6, standing in a hospital hallway, asking the same question, and no one, not a single person, had answered him honestly. "The doctors are coming," he said. "And they are going to help her. That is their job, and they are very good at it." He didn't say, "She'll be fine." He didn't say, "Don't worry," because Milo Kessler didn't make promises he couldn't keep. But he said it in a voice that was steady and sure, and Lily's shoulders dropped half an inch, and some of the terror in her eyes retreated, just enough, because a steady voice in the dark is sometimes all a child needs. The ambulance arrived 4 minutes later. Milo stood back and watched as the paramedics worked. They confirmed what he'd suspected: severe hypoglycemia, complicated by what appeared to be diabetic ketoacidosis. She'd likely been in a state of crisis for hours before she collapsed. If Lily hadn't gone for help, if she'd waited until morning, her mother might not have survived. They loaded Nora onto a stretcher. Lily tried to climb on with her, and a paramedic gently held her back. "Sweetheart, you can't ride in." "She rides with her mother," Milo said. It wasn't a request. The paramedic looked at Milo, at his clothes, his posture, the way he occupied space like someone who owned it, and decided not to argue. Lily rode in the ambulance, holding her mother's limp hand. Milo followed in the Escalade. Victor didn't ask why. He just drove. The snow kept falling. Northwestern Memorial, 11:14 p.m. The emergency room was what emergency rooms always are on winter nights in Chicago. Bright, loud, overwhelmed. A homeless man with frostbite argued with a triage nurse. A teenage boy held a blood-soaked towel against his forearm while his mother filled out paperwork with shaking hands. Somewhere behind a curtain, someone was crying. Somewhere else, a machine beeped with the rhythmic insistence of a metronome counting, down to something no one wanted to hear. Nora was taken straight through. Critical. The word passed between medical staff like a baton. Critical, critical, critical. And then she disappeared behind double doors, and Lily was left standing in the fluorescent hallway with Milo's coat still wrapped around her and her mother's hand still ghosting in her palm. Milo stood beside her. Victor stood behind him. The three of them formed an incongruous picture. The crime lord, the ex-Special Forces operative, and the 4-year-old in pajamas. As a nurse approached, young, tired, name tag read Priya. "Are you family?" she asked, looking at Milo. "No." "The child's father?" "No." Priya's expression shifted, a calculation behind her eyes. A man she didn't know, with a child who wasn't his, following an unconscious woman into the ER at 11 o'clock at night. She glanced at Victor, at his size, at the way he stood. "I'm going to need to contact social services," she said carefully. "I understand," Milo said. "Do what you need to do, but the child stays near her mother. She's frightened. Moving her will make it worse." Sir, it's hospital policy. And it's common sense that separating a scared child from her only parent during a medical emergency does more harm than any policy prevents. His voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was something underneath it, an authority that didn't come from volume or aggression. It came from certainty, the absolute, unshakable certainty of a man who had spent his entire adult life being obeyed. Priya hesitated, then she nodded. I'll bring a chair and a blanket. Thank you, Milo said, and he meant it. They waited. Lily sat in a blue vinyl chair that was too big for her feet dangling inches above the floor. Milo had found her a hot chocolate from the vending machine, powdered, watery, barely warm. She held it with both hands and sipped it like it was the finest thing she'd ever tasted. Mommy says hot chocolate is for special days, she said quietly. Milo sat in the chair beside her. He'd never been good at conversation, not the real kind, not the kind that didn't involve leverage or negotiation. But something about this girl's voice, small and matter-of-fact, in the way only children can be, made him listen in a way he hadn't listened to anyone in years. What makes a day special? He asked. Lily thought about it seriously, the way children consider questions that adults have stopped asking. When mommy doesn't have to go to work, when we can stay in our pajamas and watch movies, when she reads to me 3 times instead of 1. She paused. And when it snows. Mommy says snow makes everything quiet. She says the world needs quiet sometimes. Milo looked at the window. Snow was still falling, thick and steady, blanketing the parking lot in white. Sometimes she forgets to eat. I tell her sometimes she forgets to eat. I tell her to eat, but she says she's not hungry, and I know she's lying because her tummy rumbles. But she gives me her food and says she already ate, and I know she didn't. The words came out in a rush, the way confessions do when they've been carried too long. This child had been watching her mother disappear, one skipped meal at a time, one ration dose at a time, and she'd been carrying the weight of that observation in her small body, like a stone. Milo said nothing for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, "You are very brave, Lily. What you did tonight, going out in the cold, finding someone, asking for help. Most grown-ups couldn't do that. I was really scared," she whispered, "being scared and doing it anyway. That's what brave means." She looked at him, really looked at him, and for a moment, Milo felt something he hadn't felt since he was 6 years old. Seen, not assessed, not feared, not calculated, just seen. By a 4-year-old with hot chocolate on her upper lip and her mother's courage in her bones. At 12:30 a.m., a doctor emerged. Dr. Anand Chakravarti, 50s, calm in the way that comes from decades of delivering news, both kinds. The patient, Nora Sullivan, is stable, he said. Diabetic ketoacidosis, brought on by prolonged insulin insufficiency. She was severely dehydrated and malnourished. We've started an insulin drip and IV fluids. She'll need to stay for observation, likely 48 to 72 hours, possibly longer depending on her kidney function. Will she recover? Milo asked. Physically, yes, but this isn't the kind of thing that happens once. If the underlying issues aren't addressed, medication access, nutrition, rest, it will happen again. And next time she may not be as lucky. Lucky. The word sat in the air like smoke. Lucky that her 4-year-old daughter had walked 8 blocks in the snow to find a stranger. Lucky that the stranger she'd found was a man with the resources to mobilize an ambulance in minutes. Lucky that she was alive. Luck wasn't a strategy. Milo knew that better than anyone. Hey, thank you, doctor, he said. I'd like the billing to come to me. All of it, current and future. Dr. Chakravarti blinked. Sir, I'm not sure. My assistant will provide the details in the morning. He handed the doctor a card. Plain white. Just a phone number. No name. The doctor took it, looked at it, and decided, like the paramedic before him, that this was not a man to argue with. And then, social services arrived. Her name was Margaret Bowen. Late 40s, short, built like a fire hydrant. The kind of woman who had seen everything twice and believed in procedure the way some people believe in God, completely, unwaveringly, and with righteous indignation toward anyone who didn't. She assessed the situation in 30 seconds. Unconscious mother, minor child, no family on record, no legal guardian present. She turned to Milo with the expression of someone who had already made a decision and was simply going through the formality of communicating it. The child will need to be placed in temporary foster care until the mother is able to. No. The word was quiet, not aggressive, not threatening, but it filled the hallway like a physical thing. "Excuse me," Margaret said. "The child will not be placed in foster care," Milo said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't step forward. He stood perfectly still, hands in his pockets, and spoke with the measured certainty of someone reading the final terms of a contract. "Her mother is expected to recover within 72 hours. Placing a child in foster care for 72 hours causes psychological harm that far outweighs any procedural benefit. I will serve as temporary guardian." Margaret's face cycled through several expressions: surprise, indignation, suspicion, and finally, the cold calculation of bureaucratic self-preservation. "And who exactly are you?" "My name is Milo Kessler. I am a business owner with no criminal record, substantial resources, and, most importantly, I am the person this child came to for help. And I am not going to abandon her to a system that will put her in a stranger's house with other traumatized children while her mother fights for her life 50 feet away." He said it all without blinking, without raising his voice by so much as a decibel. Margaret opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. "There are procedures, Mr. Kessler. Background checks, home assessments. Then I suggest you expedite them. My attorney's name is David Bernstein. His number is on my card. He will cooperate fully with any investigation." He paused. But the child stays with me tonight." "Not negotiable." Margaret stared at him for a long, electric moment. Then she looked at Lily. Lily had fallen asleep. She was curled up in the vinyl chair, Milo's overcoat pulled over her like a blanket. The empty, hot chocolate cup still clasped in one hand. Her face was peaceful, in a way it hadn't been all night. And in her sleep, she'd shifted so that her head was leaning against the arm of Milo's chair, not quite touching him, but close. As close as she could get without actually crossing the line between strangers. Margaret looked at that image. The sleeping child. The man in the black turtleneck who had just told a city official not negotiable with the quiet certainty of someone who meant it absolutely. She sighed. "I'll need your full information by morning," she said, "and I will be conducting a home visit within 24 hours. "Understood." Margaret left. Her heels echoed down the hallway like a metronome winding down. Victor, who had been standing against the wall like a piece of furniture, leaned close to Milo. "Boss, are you sure about this?" Milo looked at Lily, asleep, safe, leaning toward him in unconscious trust. "No," he said, "but I'm doing it anyway." Victor nodded. He'd learned a long time ago that when Milo said, "I'm doing it anyway," it was the most honest thing the man was capable of saying. Milo Kessler's penthouse occupied the top 2 floors of a building in the Gold Coast that didn't have a name on its facade. No lobby signage, no doorman in a uniform calling cabs, just a private elevator that required a key card and a code and opened directly into a space that most people would never know existed. 3,000 square feet of polished concrete floors, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the kind of minimalist design that whispered money so quietly you had to lean in to hear it. Everything was gray, black, or white. The kitchen had never been used for anything more complex than coffee. The living room furniture, a low-profile Italian sectional, a glass coffee table, a single abstract painting that cost more than Nora's annual rent, looked like it belonged in a magazine rather than a home. Because it wasn't a home. It was a base, a headquarters, a place to sleep and shower and change clothes between the things that actually mattered. Meetings, acquisitions, the endless chess game of power and territory. Milo had never hung a photograph on these walls. He'd never cooked a meal in that kitchen. He'd never sat on that couch and watched something just because it was beautiful. He carried Lily in from the elevator. She'd fallen asleep in the car, completely unconscious in the way only exhausted children can manage. Boneless, heavy, her face pressed against his shoulder and her breath warm on his neck. He held her the way you hold something, irreplaceable and fragile, with both arms and absolute attention, and he walked through his penthouse and realized, for the first time, how empty it was, not in square footage, in warmth. The sound of his footsteps echoed off the concrete. The windows showed the city below, glittering and indifferent. The thermostat was set to 68, but the place felt colder than that. It felt like what it was, a space designed for a man who had trained himself to need nothing and no one. He carried Lily to the guest bedroom. It had never been used, not once. White sheets, gray duvet, a single bedside lamp. He set her down gently, still wrapped in his coat, and pulled the duvet over her. She murmured something in her sleep, a word he couldn't quite catch. It might have been mommy. He stood in the doorway and watched her sleep, and for the first time in 26 years, Milo Kessler didn't know what to do. He called David Bernstein at 1:30 in the morning. David was his attorney, also his oldest friend, or the closest thing Milo had to one. They'd met at Northwestern Law, where Milo had spent 2 years before deciding that the legal system was too slow a mechanism for the kind of power he intended to wield. David had stayed, graduated, passed the bar, and eventually become the kind of lawyer who handled the legal affairs of people whose affairs could never fully be legal. "It's 1:30, David said, his voice thick with sleep. "I need you to file for emergency temporary guardianship of a minor. Tonight." Silence. Then, "What?" Milo explained, briefly, efficiently, the way he explained everything. David was quiet for a long time. "Milo, you understand what you're asking. Social services is going to investigate. They're going to look into your background, your real background. If they dig deep enough, they won't. That's why I have you." "That's not," David sighed. "Why are you doing, this? You don't know this woman. You don't know this child." Milo was silent for a moment. "Because no one came for me," he said. It was the most honest thing he'd said in years, and he hung up before David could respond, because honesty, for Milo Kessler, was a door he could only keep open for so long before the draft became unbearable. The next morning, Lily woke up screaming. It was 5:47 a.m. Milo hadn't slept. He'd been sitting in the living room in the dark, watching the snow fall over the lake, running calculations he didn't have formulas for. When the scream came, high and sharp and terrified, he was on his feet and moving before his brain fully processed the sound. She was sitting up in the guest bed, tangled in the enormous duvet, eyes wild, looking around a room she didn't recognize and remembering all at once everything from the night before. "Mommy! Where's Mommy? I want Mommy!" Milo stood in the doorway. What? He didn't rush in. He didn't try to hold her. He understood instinctively that a strange man approaching a terrified child in an unfamiliar room was not reassurance. It was another layer of fear. "Lily," he said, calm, steady. "It's me. From last night. Your mom is at the hospital. She's being taken care of by doctors. She's going to be okay." Lily stared at him, breathing hard, her small chest heaving. "I want to see her." "You will, I promise. We'll go this morning, but first..." He paused, considered. "Are you hungry?" Her lip trembled. Then, in the very small voice of a child who has learned to be practical about her needs, "A little bit," Milo nodded. "Okay." He walked to the kitchen. He opened the refrigerator. It contained a bottle of sparkling water, 2 containers of Greek yogurt past their expiration date, a jar of cornichons, and half a lemon. He stared at it. A man who had orchestrated the movement of millions of dollars worth of goods across state lines, who had negotiated with people who killed for a living, who had built an empire on the foundation of his father's ashes, stood in front of his own refrigerator and realized he could not feed a child. He closed the refrigerator. He opened it again as if something might have materialized in the intervening 3 seconds. It had not. "Victor," he said into his phone. "Boss, I need groceries for a child, whatever children eat, quickly." A pause. The kind of pause that, from Victor, was the equivalent of a standing ovation of surprise. What kind of child, boss? The kind that's 4, maybe 5, I don't... Milo pressed his thumb and forefinger against the bridge of his nose. Just pancake mix, milk, fruit, things with colors, not gray. Children don't eat gray food. Another pause, longer this time. Yes, boss. While waiting for Victor, Milo did something he had never done before. He searched the internet for how to make a child feel safe. He sat at his kitchen counter, polished black granite, spotless, never used for anything except holding his laptop, and read articles written by child psychologists and parenting experts. He read about the importance of routine, of predictability, of speaking at eye level, of not making promises you can't keep, of validating emotions instead of dismissing them. He read it all with the same focus he brought to business intelligence reports, and somewhere in the reading, he became aware that everything he was learning, every single piece of advice about how to help a frightened child, was the exact opposite of how he had been raised. Klaus Kessler had never spoken to Milo at eye level, had never validated an emotion, had never asked how Milo felt about anything, because in the Kessler household, feelings were a liability. You controlled them, or they controlled you. There was no middle ground. Milo closed the laptop. He sat in the quiet of his penthouse and listened to the radiator tick and the wind press against the windows, and he thought about his mother, Anna Kessler. He hadn't let himself think her name in years. Anna, who had smelled like vanilla and been afraid of thunderstorms. Anna, who read him stories in German and English, alternating pages, so he'd grow up knowing both. Anna, who had laughed, actually laughed, the kind that shook her whole body, at his jokes, even the ones that weren't funny, because she believed that the greatest gift you could give a child was the feeling of being delightful. Anna, who had dropped like a stone in the middle of a Tuesday afternoon and taken the last of Milo's softness with her. Or so he'd thought. From the guest bedroom, he heard Lily's voice. "Mister, do you have any crayons?" He didn't. He added it to the list he was building in his head, a list that was growing longer by the minute and that bore no resemblance to any list he'd ever made before. It did not include supply chain logistics, territorial negotiations, or leverage assessments. It included crayons and children's shampoo and whether 4-year-olds still needed car seats, and if so, what kind. He was, he realized, completely out of his depth, and for the first time in as long as he could remember, he didn't hate the feeling. Victor arrived with 6 bags of groceries and an expression that suggested he had undergone a profound, personal experience in the cereal aisle. There were 47 kinds of cereal, he said, setting the bags on the counter. 47. I selected 3 based on sugar content and the presence of cartoon animals on the box. Fine. Also, the pancake mix has instructions on the back. I read them. They are simple, even for you. If anyone else had said that, Milo would have ended the conversation with a look. But Victor had earned the right to a certain degree of honesty, and the faintest shadow of amusement, barely a twitch at the corner of his mouth, passed over Milo's face before it disappeared. He made pancakes. The first 2 were disasters. One stuck to the pan so thoroughly that it became a permanent part of the cookware. The other was raw in the middle and burned on the edges, an achievement in contradictory failure that Milo would have found impressive if it hadn't been so thoroughly humiliating. The third was passable. By the 5th, something shifted. The batter hit the pan, the bubbles formed, and when he flipped it, it landed golden brown and intact, and he felt a satisfaction that was entirely disproportionate to the task and entirely earned nonetheless. He put the pancakes on a plate, cut a banana over them, poured a glass of milk. Lily appeared in the kitchen doorway, wearing yesterday's pajamas and his overcoat dragging behind her like a train. She looked at the plate. She looked at Milo. "You made those?" "Yes. They look bumpy. They're supposed to look like that." They were not supposed to look like that. Lily climbed onto a bar stool that was comically too tall for her. She picked up a fork that was comically too big for her hand. She took a bite. She chewed. Considered. The way a food critic at a Michelin-starred restaurant considers. Then she said, "They're good. Mommy makes them flatter, but these are good." And Milo Kessler, the man who controlled shipping lanes and silenced rivals and had once looked a federal prosecutor in the eye and made him blink first, felt something warm spread through his chest. Pride. Over pancakes. He sat across from her and drank his coffee and watched her eat, and the penthouse felt, for the first time since he'd bought it, like it contained life. The first day was survival. The second was adjustment. By the third, something was forming that Milo didn't have a name for. Oito, Margaret Bowen came for her home visit at 9 a.m. on Friday. She looked around the penthouse with the expression of someone searching for flaws in a diamond, determined, professional, and slightly annoyed that she couldn't find any. The space had changed. In 36 hours, Lily had colonized it with the ruthless efficiency of a 4-year-old who has decided that a place is hers. Crayons on the coffee table, a blanket fort in the corner of the living room, constructed from couch cushions, and the cashmere throw that had previously been the most expensive decorative element in the room. A drawing stuck to the refrigerator with a magnet that Victor had purchased from a gas station. It showed 2 stick figures, one very tall and one very small, standing in what appeared to be a snowstorm. "That's you," Lily told Milo, pointing to the tall one. "And that's me. Why is my head so big?" "Because you think a lot, I can tell." Margaret observed all of this. She observed, Lily's ease in the space. She observed the way Milo spoke to her, at eye level, with patience without condescension. She observed the groceries in the pantry, the children's toothbrush in the bathroom, the small pile of books and art supplies that had appeared, as if delivered by a very efficient and well-funded ferry. She left after 45 minutes with a provisional approval and a promise to return. At the door, she paused. "Mr. Kessler, I've been doing this job for 22 years. I've seen a lot of people step up for children. Most of them do it because they think it makes them look good. Very few do it because they actually see the child." She looked at him. "You see her. I don't know why, and frankly it's not my business, but I see that you see her, and that matters." She left. Milo stood at the closed door for a long time. That evening, Lily asked a question that cracked something open. They were sitting on the couch. Milo was reading a financial report. Lily was drawing. The silence between them had become comfortable, a rare achievement, because Milo's silences usually made people nervous, and Lily's usual state was a steady stream of observation and commentary. "Do you have a mommy?" she asked. Milo set down the report. "I did. She died when I was a little older than you." Lily stopped drawing. She looked at him with an expression that was neither pity nor fear. It was understanding. The kind that shouldn't be possible in a 4-year-old, but sometimes is, because children haven't yet learned to guard themselves against other people's pain. "Were you scared?" "Yes." "Did someone take care of you?" The honest answer was, not the way anyone should take care of a child. The honest answer was, my father took care of the empire and expected the empire to take care of me, and it did in its way, by teaching me that vulnerability was weakness and tenderness was something. Milo was sitting and placed her small. Milo was sitting and placed her small hand on his forearm. Just placed it there. Didn't pat. Didn't squeeze. Just rested it there, warm and light, like a small bird landing on a branch. "I'm sorry about your mommy," she said, and Milo Kessler, who had not cried since he was 6 years old, who had received the news of his father's death with a nod and a glass of bourbon, who had buried friends and rivals alike with dry eyes and a steady hand, felt his throat tighten, felt his eyes burn, felt the fracture that had started in a snowy alley 2 nights ago spread a little further, a little deeper, reaching towards something he had walled off so long ago he'd forgotten it was there. He didn't cry, not yet. That wall was too thick to come down in an evening, but the crack was there, and through it came something warm and terrifying and impossible to name. "Thank you, Lily," he said. She nodded, climbed back onto the couch and resumed drawing as if she hadn't just performed a small act of emotional surgery on a man the FBI had been trying to understand for a decade. The days took on a rhythm. Mornings, pancakes, they were getting better. By Sunday, Milo could produce a stack that Lily rated almost as good as Mommy's, the highest honor he had ever received. Mid-morning, hospital visit. They went every day. Lily sat beside her mother's bed and held her hand and talked to her, even though Nora was sedated and couldn't respond. She told her about the penthouse, about the pancakes, about how Victor was really big, but also really nice because he'd brought her a stuffed rabbit that she'd named Sir Hopsalot. Milo stood by the window during these visits. He didn't interfere, he watched, and each time, as Lily talked to her sleeping mother with the earnest belief that her words were being heard, Milo felt the walls inside him thin. Afternoons, they explored, not the Chicago Milo knew, not the private dining rooms and rooftop bars and boardrooms of his world. Lily's Chicago, the public library, where she showed him the children's section with the pride of a curator showing off a gallery. The park by the lake, where she tried to build a snowman that collapsed 3 times before Milo, with the precision of an engineer and the barely concealed competitiveness of a man who did not accept failure in any domain, including snowman construction, helped her build one that stood. Lily named it Gregory. She gave Gregory a carrot nose, rock eyes, and one of Milo's gloves for a hand. "You're going to want that glove back," Victor observed from the car. "No," Milo said. "Gregory needs it more." Victor stared at him, said nothing, but something shifted in his expression, something that looked, if you squinted, like respect of a different kind. On the 4th night, Lily had a nightmare. Milo heard it from the living room where he'd been going through security reports. The scream was different from the first morning's cry. This one came from deeper, from the place where children store the fears they can't articulate during the day. He went to her room. She was sitting up, sobbing, fists clenched in the duvet. "Mommy was on the floor again," she gasped. "And I couldn't find you. I was running and I couldn't find anyone." Milo sat on the edge of the bed. He didn't reach for her. He didn't pull her into a hug. He had read enough in his frantic research to know that children in crisis need to feel control, not constraint. "I'm here," he said. "Right here. I'm not going anywhere." "Promise?" He looked at her, tear-streaked, trembling, asking for the one thing he'd sworn never to give lightly. "Promise." She crawled into his lap, just climbed right in, without permission, without hesitation, the way children do when they've decided that a person is safe. She pressed her face against his chest and cried, and he held her, stiffly at first, because he genuinely didn't know how, and then less stiffly, and then with both arms, and then with something that felt like the most natural thing in the world, and also the most terrifying. She fell asleep like that, against his chest. Her breathing slowed, her fists unclenched. Milo sat in the dark guest room of his penthouse and held a sleeping child, and stared at the ceiling and felt, with the quiet violence of tectonic shift, the foundation of his identity rearrange itself. He had built himself into a fortress, stone by stone, year by year, shutting out everything that could hurt him, everything that could reach him. He had made himself untouchable, unreachable, unbreakable, and this 4-year-old with her bumpy pancake, reviews, and her crayon drawings, and her small, warm hand on his forearm, had walked straight through the walls without even noticing they were there. She opened her eyes on a Tuesday. Nora Sullivan came back to consciousness the way divers surface from deep water, in stages with pressure changes, gasping. The hospital room assembled itself around her in fragments. Fluorescent light, the smell of antiseptic, the steady beep of the heart monitor, the IV in her arm, then memory, arriving like a delayed train, carrying everything she'd been trying to outrun. The last thing she remembered was standing in her kitchen. She'd been dizzy. So dizzy, the room had tilted, and she'd reached for the counter, but it wasn't where her hand expected it to be, and then the floor was coming up very fast, and her last conscious thought was not about herself. It was about Lily. Lily. Nora tried to sit up. Machines protested. A nurse appeared. Priya, who had been on shift when Nora arrived, and had requested to remain on her case because something about this woman's story had lodged in her chest like a splinter. "Mrs. Sullivan, please. My daughter. Where is my daughter?" Her voice was hoarse, cracked, the voice of someone who hasn't spoken in 5 days. But the urgency was sharp enough to cut. "She's safe. She's completely safe. She's been looked after by who? Who has my daughter?" Nora's eyes were wild. The primal fear of a mother separated from her child. Older than civilization, deeper than language. "A man named Milo Kessler. He brought you in. He's been coming every day with Lily to visit you. She's safe, Mrs. Sullivan. She's been eating, sleeping, talking our ears off. She drew you about 30 pictures." Priya gestured to the windowsill, where a stack of crayon drawings sat in a messy pile. Stick figures, paidi, rainbows, a lopsided heart with mommy written across it in letters that went uphill. Nora stared at the drawings. Her lip trembled. Then she broke. Not the way Milo broke things. Controlled, internal, barely visible. Nora broke the way people break when they've been holding themselves together with nothing but stubbornness and love, and the stubbornness finally runs out. She sobbed. Deep, wrenching, full-body sobs that made the heart monitor spike and the IV drip swing on its pole. She sobbed because she'd almost died, because her daughter had walked through the snow alone at night to find help, because she'd been rationing insulin for 3 months, and she'd known that she was gambling with her life, and she'd done it anyway because the alternative was Lily going hungry. Lily losing the apartment. Lily ending up in the system. She sobbed because she'd tried so hard, and it hadn't been enough. Priya sat beside her and didn't say anything, because sometimes the most useful thing a person can do is witness. Milo brought Lily that afternoon. He had been told that Nora was awake, and he'd driven to the hospital with a composure that belied the fact that his heart rate had increased by 30% upon receiving the call, a physiological reaction Victor noticed on the rearview mirror and wisely did not comment on. Lily ran down the hospital corridor the moment she saw the room number. She burst through the door with the force of a small cannonball and launched herself onto the bed, and Nora caught her, despite the IV, despite the monitors, despite 5 days of unconsciousness and a body that still felt like it belonged to someone else. "Mommy! Oh baby, oh my baby!" They held each other. Lily buried her face in her mother's neck, and Nora buried her face in Lily's hair. And they rocked together on the hospital bed, and the sounds they made were not words but something older. The sounds of reunion, of relief, of two people who are each other's entire world, finding their way back. Milo stood in the doorway. He didn't enter. He understood, with the clarity of someone who has spent his life reading rooms, that this moment was not his. He was an outsider looking in, a man standing on the threshold of something he had never had and had long ago stopped believing existed. He turned to leave. "Wait," Nora's voice, stronger than it should have been, given the circumstances. He turned back. She was looking at him over Lily's head. Her eyes were red, swollen, still wet. But they were also sharp, intelligent, taking him in with the speed of someone accustomed to assessing situations quickly, the cost of a life spent navigating systems designed to grind you down. Nora Sullivan was 31 years old. Dark brown hair, currently unwashed and tangled against the hospital pillow. Hazel eyes, not the storybook kind, but the real kind, more brown than green, with a ring of gold near the pupil that showed in certain light. She was thin, too thin, the kind of thin that comes from feeding your child instead of yourself. Her face was angular, sharp-boned, with the kind of beauty that doesn't announce itself, but becomes more apparent the longer you look. She had been beautiful once in the conventional sense, before exhaustion and worry had whittled her down. But what remained was more striking than what had been lost. Her face had the quality of something refined by fire, stripped of everything unnecessary, everything ornamental until only the essential was left. "You're the one who brought me here?" she asked. "Your daughter brought you here," Milo said. "I just drove." Something crossed Nora's face, not quite a smile, Not quite suspicion, something in between. The expression of a woman who has learned that nothing in life is free and is trying to calculate the cost of what has just been given. Lily says you made her pancakes. They were bumpy, Lily added helpfully from her mother's chest. They were adequate, Milo said. Nora studied him. The turtleneck, the watch, the way he stood, not uncomfortable but contained, self-possessed, like a man who was used to controlling the temperature of every room he entered, and was, for once, not sure where to set it. Mr. Kessler, Milo. Milo. She said his name carefully as if testing it. Thank you for what you did. I don't know how to. She stopped, swallowed hard. I don't take charity. This isn't charity. Then what is it? Milo considered the question. He considered it the way he considered all important questions, with complete attention, and without rushing to fill the silence with an answer that sounded good but meant nothing. Your daughter walked 8 blocks in the snow at night because she believed someone would help, he said. That kind of faith deserves to be proven right. Nora's eyes glistened. She blinked it. Away, quickly, decisively, the way people do when they've learned that tears are a luxury they can't afford. I'll pay you back, she said. Every cent. I don't know how yet, but I will. We'll discuss it later, Milo said. Right now, your only job is to recover. He left then, walked down the hospital corridor with Victor at his shoulder, out into the January cold, where the snow had started again. Victor looked at him. She's going to be difficult, Victor said. Yes. Pride. Yes. You like that? Milo didn't answer, but something happened to his face, a softening so subtle it was like watching granite warm in sunlight, and Victor, who had seen his boss negotiate with warlords and walk through fire and remain utterly unchanged, knew with absolute certainty that everything was about to change. Nora was released on a Friday. She walked out of Northwestern Memorial with a bag of medication, a glucose monitoring kit, a sheaf of follow-up instructions, and the bone-deep exhaustion of someone who has stared into the abyss and been sent home with a pamphlet. Milo was waiting with the car. Lily was in the back seat with Sir Hopsalot, practically vibrating with excitement. We're not going back to the apartment, Milo said as Nora approached the Escalade. It wasn't a command. It was a statement of fact, delivered the way one might say, it's snowing, or the earth is round. Nora stopped. Excuse me. Your building has black mold in the ventilation system. The heating is intermittent. The lock on the front door is broken. None of those conditions are safe for a child or someone recovering from a medical emergency. It's my home. It's a building you pay rent to live in. It doesn't have to be the only option. Nora's jaw set. It was a good jaw. Sharp, stubborn. The kind that telegraphed resistance before the words arrived. And, the words arrived quickly. I told you, I don't take charity. You said that. This isn't charity either. He reached into his coat and produced a folder. Inside was a lease agreement, a job offer, and a building address. This is a property I own in Lincoln Park. 2 bedrooms, clean, heated. The rent is subsidized, but it's not free. You'll pay what you can afford. He held out the second document. And this is a position with a healthcare staffing company I have an interest in. Benefits, insurance, predictable hours, a single shift, not 3. You're a trained nurse. I saw the scrubs. This position respects that. It's not a handout. It's employment. Nora took the folder. She read it the way she read everything, carefully, looking for the trap, looking for the fine print that said, "You owe me," in language elegant enough to pass for generosity. She didn't find it, because it wasn't there. Why? She asked, not angry, genuinely confused. Why are you doing this? Milo looked at her, really looked at her, not at the sharp jaw or the hazel eyes or the way the January light caught the gold in her iris. He looked at her the way he looked at things he was trying to understand, with complete, focused attention. Because I've spent my life accumulating power, he said. Oh, and this is the first time I've had the chance to use it for something that matters. The words hung in the cold air between them. Honest, unvarnished. The kind of statement that, from most men, would sound rehearsed, but from Milo sounded like a confession. Nora looked at the folder, at the building address, at the salary listed on the job offer, which was more than she'd made at all 3 of her previous jobs combined. She looked at Lily, who was pressing her face against the car window and fogging it up and drawing a smiley face in the condensation. Then she looked at Milo. "If I take this," she said, quietly, "it's because my daughter deserves stability, not because I need a savior. Understood? And if at any point I feel like there's an expectation attached, any expectation, I walk, no matter what. I would expect nothing less." She held his gaze for a long moment. Searching. Testing. Then she got in the car. The apartment in Lincoln Park was everything her old place was not. Second floor of a brownstone. Hardwood floors, warm and honey-colored. A kitchen with a window that let in afternoon light. 2 bedrooms, one for Nora, one for Lily, with actual closets and doors that locked. A bathroom with tiles that weren't cracked, heat that worked, hot water that stayed hot. Lily ran from room to room with Sir Hops-a-Lot, discovering everything with the wide-eyed wonder of a child who has just been told the world can be bigger than she thought. "Mommy, there's a bathtub, a big one." Nora stood in the kitchen and pressed her hand against the counter and breathed. Milo had stayed by the door. He understood that this moment, the moment of arrival, of relief, of the private reckoning between what was and what is, was not his to share. "The fridge is stocked," he said. "Lily helped choose, so there may be an excessive amount of strawberry yogurt." Nora didn't turn around. Her shoulders were shaking. She was crying again, but silently this time, the way she did when Lily was nearby. The practiced, invisible tears of a mother who never lets her child see her fall apart. "Thank you," she said, so quietly it was almost not a sound. "You earned this, Nora. All of it. The fact that the system failed you doesn't mean you failed." She turned then, her face wet, her eyes fierce. "You don't know anything about me. I know that your daughter is brave, kind, and articulate. I know that she draws rainbows on every picture she makes because someone taught her to look for color. I know that your apartment was clean, even when everything else was falling apart. I know that you chose your own health as the last priority because your daughter was the first." He paused. "I know enough." Nora stared at him, and for a moment, just a moment, the armor she wore fell away. And what was underneath was not weakness, but weariness. The profound, grinding exhaustion of a woman who had been carrying everything alone for so long that she'd forgotten what it felt like to set something down. "Stay for dinner," she said. It wasn't a thank you. It wasn't gratitude. It was the first voluntary invitation she'd made since moving in, and Milo understood, with the precision of a man who measured everything, that it meant more than any check he could write. "Okay," he said. She made spaghetti. It was simple. Noodles, jarred sauce, garlic bread from the freezer section. The kind of meal that costs $8 and feeds 3 and takes 20 minutes. And it was, without exaggeration, the best meal Milo had eaten in years. Not because of the food, because of the context. Because Lily sat in a booster seat at a kitchen table and told a story about a caterpillar she'd seen at the park that was really fuzzy, like a tiny dog, but with more legs. Because Nora laughed, actually laughed, a sound that was low and warm and rusty from disuse, and the laugh changed her entire face, made her look younger, lighter, like a photograph developing in reverse. Because Milo sat at a table with 2 people who expected nothing from him except his presence, and discovered that his presence, the thing he'd always considered his least valuable asset, was enough. After dinner, Lily demanded a story, not from a book, from Milo. "You have to make one up," she instructed, "with a princess and a dragon, but the dragon is nice." Milo looked at Nora, who was leaning against the kitchen counter with a cup of tea and an expression that said, "You're on your own." He sat on the couch. Lily climbed into his lap. She fit there now. She'd found the exact angle that worked, her head against his shoulder, her feet tucked against his thigh, and the familiarity of it The ease made something in Milo's chest expand. Once upon a time, he began. He paused. He had no idea where this was going. He had planned hostile takeovers with less uncertainty. There was a dragon who lived in a cave. He was very large and very strong, and everyone in the kingdom was afraid of him. Why? Lily asked. Because he breathed fire, and his voice was loud, and he never let anyone come close. Why not? Milo was quiet for a beat. Because a long time ago, someone he loved had gone away, and it hurt so much that he decided it was safer to be alone. So he built his cave deep and dark, and he stayed inside, and he told himself he didn't need anyone. Lily listened intently. But one day, Milo continued, a very small, very brave princess knocked on his door. Why was she brave? Because she wasn't afraid. Everyone else ran from the dragon, but she walked right up to his cave and knocked, and when he opened the door and roared, trying to scare her away, she looked at him and said, "You're not scary. You're just sad." Silence. Lily was rapt. And the dragon didn't know what to do with that, because no one had ever seen through his fire before. No one had ever looked past the roar and the flames and the darkness and seen the sadness underneath. But this princess, this small, brave princess, she saw everything. "So what happened?" Lily whispered. She came back the next day, and the day after that. She brought him berries and told him stories, and slowly, very slowly, the dragon started to come out of his cave. Not all at once, just a little bit at a time. First, just his nose, then his head. And one day, he walked all the way out into the sunlight, and the princess took his hand, and he realized that the world wasn't as cold as he'd thought. Lily was asleep before he finished, her breathing deep and even against his chest. Milo looked up. Nora was standing in the kitchen doorway. Her tea had gone cold in her hands. Her eyes were bright. She didn't say anything. But the way she looked at him, past the turtleneck and the Patek Philippe and the quiet authority, told him that she'd heard every word of that story and understood that it wasn't really about a dragon at all. Nora Sullivan had been carrying things her whole life. She was born in Bridgeport on the south side, the daughter of a carpenter and a school cafeteria worker. Her childhood was small but solid, not wealthy, not poor, just the particular shade of working class that means you never go hungry, but you also never stop worrying about whether you might. She'd been smart, scholarship smart. Scholarship. The kind of smart that made teachers pull her aside and say, you could do anything, with the earnest hopefulness of people who believed that talent was enough to overcome circumstance. She'd gone to nursing school, graduated top of her class, got a job at a hospital downtown, and felt for the first time like the trajectory of her life was pointing upward. Then her father died. Heart attack, 54, at his workbench in the middle of building a birdhouse for Nora's mother, who loved cardinals and had always wanted one in the yard. He died with wood shavings on his hands and the birdhouse half finished, and Nora's mother, who had loved her husband with the quiet, absolute devotion of someone who had never needed to say it out loud, lasted exactly 11 months before following him. Stroke, quick, as if her body had simply decided that a world without him wasn't worth navigating. Nora was 25, alone, grieving, and then she met Ryan. Ryan was charming in the where the dangerous things are often charming, bright, warm, impossible to resist until you realize that the warmth was a performance and the charm was a tool. He was funny and generous and absolutely certain about everything, which was intoxicating to a woman who was certain about nothing. They married quickly. Lily came quickly after that, and then Ryan left. Not dramatically, not with a fight or a confession or a scene. He just didn't come home one day. His clothes were gone. His phone was disconnected. The bank account was empty. All of it, including Nora's savings, her parents' small inheritance, everything. He left a note. 3 words. "I'm sorry, Nora." She never heard from him again. And so Nora Sullivan, at 27, found herself alone with a newborn, no savings, no family, and a body that had recently been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes, an autoimmune condition that would require daily insulin for the rest of her life, insulin that costs more than her rent. She didn't collapse. She didn't fall apart. She did what women like her have always done. She kept going. She worked 3 jobs. She rationed her medication. She fed her daughter and forgot to feed herself. She slept 4 hours a night and called it enough. She became a machine of survival, running on caffeine and stubbornness, and the fierce, primal determination that Lily would have a better life than this, no matter what it cost. The cost was her health. The cost was her youth. The cost was the slow, invisible erosion of a body that was kept alive by sheer willpower while the chemistry of survival ate it from the inside. That was the woman Milo Kessler had found on the floor of apartment 4B. That was the woman who was now sitting across from him at a coffee shop on a Saturday morning, 2 weeks after she'd opened her eyes, looking at him with those hazel eyes that missed absolutely nothing. "You don't seem like the kind of man who helps strangers," Nora said. They were at a small place near the Lincoln Park apartment. Lily was at a neighbor's, a woman named Dolores, who had 5 grandchildren and had adopted Lily into her orbit with the gravitational force of a woman who believed children were the point of everything. "I'm not," Milo said. "So why me?" He held his coffee, black, no sugar, and considered the question. He could have given her the sanitized version, the version that sounded noble and uncomplicated, but something about Nora's directness, the way she asked questions, like a surgeon making incisions, precise and purposeful, made him want to give her the truth. "When I was 6, my mother collapsed, same way you did, sudden, without warning. I was standing right there." He paused. "She didn't make it, and no one came. I mean, people came eventually, paramedics, doctors, my father's people, but in the actual moment when I was standing there, 6 years old, watching my mother on the floor, no one came." Nora listened. She didn't interrupt. She didn't offer sympathy or platitudes. She listened the way she listened to patients, with her whole body, leaning slightly forward, her eyes steady. "Your daughter came to find me because she believed someone would help. And I thought, if I walk away from this, then what happened to me happens again. The same story, the same empty hallway, the same child alone." He looked at his coffee. "I couldn't let that happen." Nora was quiet for a long time. "What do you actually do, Milo?" she asked. The question he'd been expecting. The question he'd been dreading. "I run a business," he said carefully. "Several businesses. Some of them are more complex than others." "That's not an answer." "It's the answer I can give you right now." She held his gaze, unflinching, and he saw in her expression not fear, not judgment, but the kind of steady evaluation. "I'm not naive, Milo. I grew up in Bridgeport. I know what complex businesses means. I'm not asking you to confess anything. I'm asking you to respect me enough to not pretend." He looked at her. At this woman who had survived everything life had thrown at her and come out the other side not hardened, not broken, but refined, clear, unbreakable in the way that only comes from having broken and rebuilt yourself so many times that you know exactly where the seams are. "I'm a powerful man," he said, "and not all of that power was acquired through legitimate means. I've never hurt an innocent person. I've never dealt in drugs or trafficking, but I'm not clean, not the way the law defines clean." He waited for her to recoil, to stand up, to take Lily and walk away. She didn't. "I'm not looking for perfect," she said. "I married perfect once. He stole everything I had and disappeared." She wrapped both hands around her coffee cup. "I'm looking for honest and for safe, not safe from the world, safe for my daughter." "Lily will always be safe," Milo said. "That I can promise. Don't promise me things you can't control." "I can control this." She studied him, searching for the lie, the performance, the angle. She didn't find one. "Okay," she said, and that single word, quiet, measured, given with the weight of a woman who didn't give her trust easily or cheaply, landed on Milo like a stone thrown into still water, sending ripples out in every direction, changing the shape of everything. February in Chicago is not a time for transformation. February is endurance. It's the month when winter stops being picturesque and becomes a siege. Gray skies, salt-crusted streets, wind that finds every gap in every coat. People put their heads down and survive it, But inside a brownstone on Amshi Lincoln Park, something was growing. It grew slowly, the way important things do. Not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but in the accumulation of small moments, each one unremarkable on its own, devastating in aggregate. Milo came for dinner twice a week, then 3 times, then every other day. He always brought something: groceries, flowers from the Korean market on Halstead, a book he'd noticed on Lily's wish list at the library. Never expensive, never excessive, just considered, the specific thoughtfulness of a man who was learning, with the intensity he brought to everything, how to care for people. He learned Nora's rhythms, that she drank her coffee with too much cream and not enough sugar, that she hummed when she cooked, old songs, half-remembered melodies from her mother's kitchen, that she read medical journals before bed the way other people read novels, because the nurse in her never fully went off duty, that she was terrified of being dependent, and equally terrified of being alone, and that the tension between those two fears was the geography of her entire inner life. She learned his. That he sat with his back to the wall in every room, that he answered his phone within 2 rings, always, because in his world, silence was information. That he drank his bourbon neat, but nursed it, 1 glass over hours, never more, because he'd watched his father drown in the bottom of a bottle and sworn he'd never follow. That beneath the controlled exterior, and the precise language, and the gray-blue eyes that saw everything, there was a loneliness so vast, it had its own weather. They didn't talk about their feelings. They weren't those people. Milo had been trained out of emotional expression before he'd had a chance to develop one, and Nora had spent so many years being strong that she'd forgotten what it felt like to be held, not physically, but emotionally. The way another person can hold space for you, can't say, without words, "I see what you're carrying and I'm not going anywhere." They communicated in other ways, in the way Milo fixed the cabinet door in the kitchen that stuck, without being asked, without mentioning it, so that Nora discovered it working smoothly one morning and stood there for a moment, with her hand on the handle and her eyes closed, in the way Nora left a plate of food for him in the refrigerator, on nights she knew he'd be late, labeled with a post-it note that said simply, "Eat." 1 word, it was enough, in the way Lily drew pictures of 3 stick figures instead of 2. The first time Milo touched Nora was an accident. She was reaching for a glass on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet, standing on her toes, stretching, her fingertips just brushing the rim. He was behind her, having come in from the living room to get water, and he reached over her, his chest near her back, his arm alongside hers, and took the glass down. Their hands touched when he handed it to her. Just fingers. Just a moment. But they both felt it. The electricity of first contact. The specific shock of skin on skin between 2 people who have been circling each other, gravitating closer, maintaining careful distance while something enormous builds in the space between. Nora took the glass. Her fingers trembled, just barely. "Thank you," she said. "Any time." He stepped back. She turned on the faucet. Neither of them acknowledged what had just happened. But the kitchen felt smaller after that. Warmer, as if the air itself had thickened. The second time was deliberate. It was late. Lily was asleep. They were sitting on the couch, a new couch because Milo had noticed that Nora's back hurt after long shifts and had arranged for a replacement that looked identical to the original but had better support, and Nora had noticed the switch and said nothing, which was its own form of acceptance. They were watching the snow. The apartment faced east, and the window framed the city skyline, and the snow was falling heavy and silent, the way it does in February, when winter has settled in and isn't going anywhere. "My mother used to say that snow was the sky's way of telling the world to rest," Nora said. Milo looked at her, in the dim light of the living room, with the snow reflected in the window behind her. She looked like something painted, something from a world he'd long since stopped believing in. "My mother used to say it was angels shaking out their blankets," he said. Nora smiled. Not the careful, measured smile she usually wore. A real one. The kind that reaches the eyes and changes everything. "I like that," she said. He reached across the space between them and took her hand. That was all. just her hand. His fingers closed around hers gently. A man who could crush concrete, holding a woman's hand like it was made of paper cranes. Nora didn't pull away. She didn't tense. She looked at their joined hands and then at his face, and what she saw there, the vulnerability, the wanting, the terrified hope of a man who had forgotten how to want anything that couldn't be acquired through power, broke through the last of her resistance. She leaned her head against his shoulder. They sat like that, in the quiet, in the snow. Two people who had been alone for so long that togetherness felt like a foreign language. They were slowly, carefully learning to speak. Neither of them said anything. They didn't need to. Milo's world did not operate on sentiment. His associates noticed the change, not immediately. Milo was too controlled for that. But in the way water wears stone, gradually, inevitably. He was leaving meetings earlier, checking his phone in a way that had nothing to do with business. There was a softness at his edges that hadn't been there before, a human warmth leaking through the armor, and in his world, warmth was vulnerability, and, vulnerability was an invitation. Thomas Calloway noticed first. Calloway was Milo's underboss, 50, silver-haired. The kind of man who smiled too easily and meant none of it. He'd been loyal to Klaus Kessler and had transferred that loyalty to Milo with the seamless efficiency of a man whose allegiance followed power, not principle. "I hear you've been spending time in Lincoln Park," he said over scotch, in the back room of a bar that didn't have a name. Nice neighborhood. Family neighborhood. The word family was loaded. In their world, it always was. "My personal life is not your concern," Milo said. "With respect, boss, everything about you is my concern. That's the job. And when the man who runs this organization starts softening, people notice. The Italians notice, the Russians notice." Milo set down his glass. The sound was small, glass on wood, but Calloway flinched. "Let me be very clear," Milo said. His voice had not changed in pitch or volume, but the temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees. "I have not softened. I have acquired something that matters to me. And anyone who interprets that as weakness will discover, with considerable regret, that they are mistaken." Calloway held up both hands, palms out, the universal gesture of retreat. "Of course, boss. I meant no disrespect." Milo held his gaze for 3 more seconds. Then he picked up his glass and drank, and the conversation moved to other things. But the seed had been planted, not in Calloway's mind, in Milo's, because Calloway wasn't wrong. Milo had spent a decade building a reputation on the absence of attachment. No wife, no children, no weakness that could be leveraged, no loved one that could be threatened. He was untouchable because there was nothing to touch. And now there was Nora and Lily. The math was simple and merciless. They made him stronger and weaker at the same time. Stronger because they gave him purpose, a reason to build, to protect, to build something beyond the endless cycle of acquisition and control. Weaker because they gave the world a way in, a pressure point, a door that, if someone found it, could bring everything down. Milo understood this. He lived in a world of calculated risk, and he knew that the risk of loving someone was the highest stakes game he'd ever played. He played it anyway. He told Nora about the risk on a Sunday, not because he wanted to frighten her, but because she deserved to know. They were walking in the park. Lily was ahead of them, chasing pigeons with the gleeful determination of a child who genuinely believes this time she'll catch one. The sun was out, rare for February, and the snow on the ground sparkled in a way that made the world look like it was made of something precious. "There are people in my world who would use you to get to me," he said. No preamble, no softening, just the fact, laid out like a card on a table. Nora didn't break stride. "I know," she said. "You know. Milo, I know what you are. I've known since the beginning. I grew up 3 blocks from a bookie's office. My uncle ran numbers for the outfit until '88. I know what power looks like when it comes home at night and takes off its coat." She paused. "The question isn't whether I know. The question is whether you're going to let fear make this decision for you." He stopped walking. She stopped with him. "I'm not afraid for myself," he said. I know. You're afraid for us. She looked at Lily, who had abandoned the pigeons and was now making a snow angel. So am I. But I've spent the last 4 years being afraid. Afraid of bills. Afraid of landlords. Afraid of my own body. I'm tired of being afraid, Milo. I'd rather be brave. She reached up and touched his face. Her hand was cold. His skin was warm. The contrast was electric. You taught my daughter that being scared and doing it anyway is what brave means, she said. Did you mean it? He covered her hand with his, held it against his cheek, closed his eyes. Yes. Then be brave. He opened his eyes, looked at her, at this woman who had survived everything, poverty and abandonment and illness and the crushing weight of a world that didn't care whether she made it or not, and who was standing here in the February sun, asking him to choose love over fear. He kissed her forehead, just her forehead. Slow, deliberate, the way you place a seal on something sacred, and Nora closed her eyes and let out a breath she felt like she'd been holding for 4 years, and the sun warmed the snow around them, and Lily shouted from the ground, "Look, Mommy, my angel has 4 wings." And Nora laughed, and Milo laughed, an actual laugh, rusty, unpracticed, surprising even to himself, and Victor, watching from the car 50 yards away, texted David Bernstein. 3 words, he laughed, out loud. David texted back, preparing the emotional apocalypse paperwork. It was Nora who found the thread. She was organizing the apartment one evening, something she did when she needed to think, her hands busy so her mind could wander, when she came across a box of her mother's things. She'd kept it in storage during the worst years, and Milo had arranged for it to be brought to the new apartment, along with her other belongings. Inside, photographs, her mother's rosary, a recipe book with stains on every page, and a framed certificate from the church. A volunteer appreciation award from 7 years ago, given to her mother for helping organize a winter food drive for families in need. Nora looked at the photograph attached to the certificate. Her mother smiling, standing next to a table of donated food. And behind her, slightly out of focus, a young man in a dark coat, handing a check to the parish priest. She didn't recognize him at first. 7 years changes a person. But then she looked closer, at the jaw, the posture, the way he stood, contained and precise, and her breath caught. It was Milo. 25, maybe 26. Thinner. Harder around the eyes, but unmistakably him. She brought the photograph to him the next time he came for dinner, set it on the table without a word. Milo picked it up, stared at it. "Oh, where did you get this?" "My mother's things. That's her, on the left. Helen Sullivan. She volunteered at St. Michael's for 20 years. Nora paused. "That's you, behind her. What were you doing at a church food drive?" Milo set the photograph down carefully, the way he handled things that mattered. "It was the year after my father died. I was searching for something. I don't know what. I went to the church because my mother used to take me there when I was small, before she died. I hadn't been back in almost 20 years. He paused. The priest, Father Okafor, he didn't ask who I was or where I came from. He just asked if I wanted to help, so I wrote a check and carried boxes." "You carried boxes?" Nora's eyebrow rose. "Heavy ones." She almost smiled. Then she pointed to the photograph, to her mother's face. "She would have talked to you. She talked to everyone. She had this way of making you feel like the most important person in the room, no matter who you were." "She did," Milo said. "She gave me a cup of coffee. Asked me if I'd eaten. I said yes. She said," he stopped, his voice had gone quiet. "She said, 'You look like a man who could use a sandwich,' and she made me one, turkey and Swiss, cut diagonally." Nora's eyes filled. "She always cut them diagonally," she whispered. "She said food tastes better when it looks nice." They sat in silence, 2 people realizing that the threads connecting them were older and deeper than they'd known. That 7 years before, a little girl walked through the snow and knocked on a dragon's door. A kind woman had made a lonely young man a sandwich, and something had been set in motion, something invisible, something patient, that had been working its way toward this moment all along. "She would have liked you," Nora said. "I think she already did," Milo said. Months passed. Winter softened into early spring. The snow retreated from the sidewalks, and the trees along the lakefront put out their first tentative buds, and the city shook off its gray coat and started to breathe again. Nora was healthy. Her insulin was covered. Her glucose was monitored. She worked a single shift at a clinic Milo's company managed, and she was good at it. So good that the head physician asked her to train incoming nurses, which she did, with the same quiet competence she brought to everything. Lily was thriving. She'd started at a pre-K program near the apartment, and within a week she was the kind of social force that teachers write notes home about. Not because she was trouble, but because she organized the other children into collaborative art projects and delivered small motivational speeches during circle time that the teacher described as concerning in their effectiveness. Milo was changing, not in any way his associates could point to. He still ran meetings with the same clinical precision. O'Day still negotiated with the same flat, devastating clarity. Still commanded respect through the simple mechanism of being Milo Kessler in a room. But underneath, in the layers of himself that no one but Nora and Lily ever saw, something was shifting. He was sleeping more, eating meals instead of forgetting them. He'd moved some of his work to the brownstone's kitchen table, where he reviewed documents while Lily colored beside him, and Nora cooked in the background. And the domesticity of it, the sheer, staggering normalcy, felt like oxygen to a man who'd closing doors that led to dark places, not just for the sake of it, but to make sure that the right people were in the right places. Closing doors that led to dark places, not all at once. Empires don't dismantle overnight, and the infrastructure of power has inertia that can't be stopped with a single gesture. But he was steering the ship, turning it, degree by degree, toward a harbor he hadn't known he was looking for. David noticed. "You're going legitimate," he said during one of their meetings, looking at the stack of corporate restructuring documents on his desk. "I'm diversifying." "You're diversifying into legal businesses and shutting down the ones that aren't. That's called going legitimate, Milo. There's a word for it. I'm aware of the word." David leaned back, studied his oldest friend. "Your father would—" "My father built something, powerful and empty, and it killed him. I'm building something different." "What?" Milo was quiet for a moment. "Something worth coming home to." David stared at him. Then he smiled, a real smile, the kind that was rare from a man who spent his days navigating legal gray areas, and said, "Anna would be proud of you." Milo's mother's name, spoken out loud for the first time in years. It landed softly, like snow. He didn't respond, but something in his face, in those winter gray eyes, warmed. Just enough, just barely. The way the first day of spring doesn't feel like much, but everything underneath the soil knows. December again. Almost a year since a little girl in a too small coat had stood in the snow and changed everything. Chicago was dressed for winter. The lights were back on Michigan Avenue, and the ice rink in Millennium Park was spinning with skaters, and the lake wind carried the smell of roasted chestnuts from the vendors who appeared every holiday season like clockwork. It was snowing. Not the bitter January snow of a year ago. This was different, softer, the kind of snow that children dream about, the kind that falls in fat, lazy flakes that catch the light and make the world feel gentle. Milo stood at the window of the Lincoln Park brownstone and watched it fall. He was wearing jeans. Just jeans and a sweater, no Patek Philippe. He'd put it in a safe months ago, not because it didn't matter, but because the things that mattered had changed. His feet were bare on the hardwood floor. There was flour on his sleeve from the cookies Lily had insisted they bake, and a crayon mark on his palm that he hadn't noticed until now. Behind him, the apartment was full of sound. Lily was singing, something from school, tuneless, enthusiastic, With lyrics, she was improvising as she went. She was standing on a step stool at the counter, decorating cookies with a level of concentration that suggested she viewed frosting as a serious artistic medium. Nora was beside her, laughing, that low, warm laugh that Milo had come to think of as the sound of his own redemption. Her hair was up, held by a clip that Lily had chosen, sparkly, purple, shaped like a butterfly. She was wearing the sweater Milo had given her, soft gray cashmere, the same color as his eyes, which she'd noticed and he'd pretended was a coincidence. They hadn't said, "I love you," not in words. Milo was not a man of words, and Nora had learned long ago that words were the least reliable form of truth. But they said it in everything else, in the way he stood behind her while she cooked and put his hand on the small of her back, and she leaned into it without thinking. In the way she left coffee ready for him every morning, black, no sugar, at exactly the temperature he liked. In the way Lily crawled into his lap every evening for a story, and he held her like she was the most important thing in the world. Freaked. Because she was. He watched the snow. He thought about the man he'd been a year ago, standing outside that restaurant. Cold in every way a person can be cold. Physically, emotionally, spiritually. A fortress. A machine. A monument to the idea that power meant needing nothing and no one. He'd been wrong. Power wasn't the ability to destroy. It wasn't territory or leverage or silence. Power, real power, the kind that lasts, the kind that means something, was this. This apartment, this warmth, this woman who challenged him and trusted him and saw him, all of him, the dark and the light, and chose to stay. This child who had walked through the snow and knocked on a dragon's door and taught him, with the simple, devastating clarity of the very young, that the strongest thing a man can do is let himself be loved. "Milo," Lily's voice, bright and insistent. "You have to come try this cookie. I made it look like your face. It's a little weird, but that's okay, because your face is a little weird." Nora snorted with laughter. "Lily." "What? It is." Milo turned from the window, looked at them. The woman and the child. His people. His family. Found, not born. Chosen, not inherited. Built not on blood or power or fear, but on something stronger. Something that had started with a small voice in the dark and a decision to answer it. He walked to the counter, picked up the cookie. It did, in fairness, look a bit weird. The frosting was mostly on one side, and Lily had given him what appeared to be 7 eyes. "It's perfect," he said. "You're just saying that." "I never say things I don't mean." Lily beamed, the kind of beam that lights up a room and a life and everything in between. Milo ate the cookie. It was too sweet and slightly burned on the bottom, and it was the best thing he'd ever tasted. And outside, the snow fell, soft and silent, covering the city in white, making everything quiet, making everything new. Somewhere in Chicago, a building in a rough neighborhood was getting new locks, new heating, new paint. The tenants didn't know who had authorized the renovations. They didn't need to. Somewhere in Chicago, a church food drive had an anonymous donor who covered the entire cost. Father Okafor, now gray-haired and still smiling, said a prayer of thanks and cut sandwiches diagonally. The way a kind woman had once taught him was the proper way. Somewhere in Chicago, a man who had been raised to believe that love was weakness was learning, one day at a time, that it was the opposite. That love was the hardest thing, the bravest thing, the only thing that had ever made him feel like more than a fortress. And somewhere in a brownstone in Lincoln Park, a little girl was drawing a picture. 3 stick figures, a tall one, a medium one, and a very small one. They were standing in snow, holding hands, and above them, in every color she owned, was the biggest rainbow she'd ever drawn. She held it up. "This is us," she said, and it was.